Join us. We're now live on YouTube. So hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone on YouTube as well. Happy Douglas Week, everyone. All right, we'll give it a go. So happy Douglas Week, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Caroline Schroeder. I'm here with my wonderful colleagues, co-organizers and friends, Sarah McCready, Kristen Leary, and Dr. Tim Groenland. And we're the organizing team behind Douglas Week. And we're so delighted to be with you. Delighted to celebrate Frederick Douglass, Ireland, literature, creativity. It's been an amazing week so far, and we're really delighted to welcome you guys here and everyone here tonight. As a scholar of literature and also film, I'm very excited about this panel as well, specifically. And before we start, just two little things of housekeeping. One is this session is being recorded and we're live on YouTube, and it will be available after Douglas Week, so you can rewatch us there. The other thing is this will be about an hour, and if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. So on the bottom of your screen, on your Zoom screen, there should be a little Q&A box, and you can pop in your question there whenever you feel like it, whenever you're ready. Be curious, ask away, pop in your question, and we'll monitor the chat or the Q&A, and we'll pass on your questions to everyone. And before we start now, I'll hand over to Dr. Tim Groenland to introduce Chanté. There you go, Tim.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, so we're really excited to present this to you. This is the final event in our literary strand of Douglas Week. Feels a little bit sad to say that because the events, I think, have been so good. We've had workshops, we've had analyses of Douglas's own writing, we've had poetry, and tonight we have a really exciting sort of discussion about literary representations of Douglas with two wonderful authors. So yeah, in the kind of transatlantic spirit of this whole thing and of this whole festival, which is you know, really enabled by and sort of somewhat of an experiment in what can be done in the online format, I'm going to bring you across now live to South Bend, Indiana, to hand you over to Dr. Chanté Mouton Kinyon. So Dr. Kinyon is currently a Murrow postdoctoral fellow at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Kinyon's primary research explores transnational African-American literature and culture, with a particular interest in the way in which African-American culture and literature intersects with Irish culture and literature. Her book project studies the influential representation Irish and African-American artists have had on each other, while theorizing the ways in which these artists signified and conceptualized race and marginality. The 2018-2019 NEH Fellow at the Keogh Naughton Institute for Irish Studies, Kinyon was previously a 4-year recipient of the Galway Research Fellowship for Doctoral Studies. Forthcoming, Kinyon's article, Foregrounding Lost Rituals and the Transatlantic Gesture, The Keen, the Cakewalk, and Disappearing Cultural Practices, will be published in Modern Drama in 2021, as will the introduction she wrote for Black Matters, African-American College Students and Graduates Tell Their Life Stories, a book currently under contract with Cornell University Press. It gives me great pleasure to hand over to Chanté, and I hope you all enjoy this event very much.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for joining us today. I have the pleasure of being joined and having a conversation today with both Colum McCann and Jewell Parker Rhodes. Colum McCann is the author of 7 novels and 3 collections of stories. Born and raised in Dublin, Ireland, he has been the recipient of many international authors, including the National Book Award, the International Dublin Impact Prize, a Chevalier d'Art et Lettres from the French government, election to the Irish Arts Academy, several European awards, the 2010 Best Foreign Novel Award in China, and an Oscar nomination. In 2017, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts. His work has been published in over 40 languages. He's the co-founder of the nonprofit Global Story Exchange organization Narrative 4, and he teaches at the MFA program at Hunter College. He lives in New York with his wife, Allison, and their family. Jewell Parker Rhodes is the award-winning author of several books for youth, including Black Brother, named Chicago Black Public Library's Best of the Best 2020, and the New York Times bestseller Ghost Boys, which has garnered over 30 awards and honors, including the Jane Addams Peace Award. Jewell is also the author of Towers Falling, winner of the 2017 Notable Books for a Global Society, and the celebrated Louisiana Girls Trilogy, Ninth Ward, winner of a Coretta Scott King Honor Award, Sugar and Bayou Magic. Jewell has visited hundreds of schools across the country and is a regular speaker at colleges and conferences. The driving force behind all of Jewell's work is to inspire social justice, equality, and environmental stewardship. Jewell currently serves as the Piper and Down Chair and founding artistic director of the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing at Arizona State University. She enjoys teaching, walking her toy Aussie sheepdogs, theater, dancing, and music. And it is my great pleasure now to turn it over to both authors. I think first we're going to have Colum read from Transatlantic, and then Jewell will read from her book, Douglas's Women.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And it's such a great pleasure. And thank you for that, that introduction. It's wonderful to be in Cork via New York and everywhere else. And I have to say, you know, a deep bow and salute to everybody who has been involved in this this Douglas Week, and I've been extraordinarily impressed by the range of activities and the access that it gives to people. So, and I was greatly honoured to be asked to come on, and I'm going to read to you a little bit, or two sections from my novel Transatlantic. Which is, I suppose, largely about the Irish peace process, and tells the story of Douglas arriving in Ireland in 1845. And in this particular section, he is with his Irish publisher, Webb, and they're in a carriage, a horse and carriage, and they're traveling into the countryside, and they've noticed that the first of the blight has begun to rot the potatoes, and this is a section in which Ireland sort of appears as an ashling or a vision, and Irish readers will sort of notice that that metaphor. At an estate house, they stopped to see if they could feed the horses. 3 guards stood on the gate, stone-carved falcons at their shoulders. The guards had shovels in their hands, but the handles of the shovels had been sharpened to a point. The landlords were absent. There had been a fire. The house smoldered. Nobody was allowed past. They were under strict instructions. The guards stared at Frederick Douglass. They tried to contain their surprise at the sight of a Negro. "Get out of here," the guard said, "now." Creeley pushed the carriage on. The roads twisted. Hedges rose high around them. Night threatened. The horses slowed. They looked ruined. A gout of spittle and foam hung from their long jaws. "Oh, move it, please," called Webb from the inner cab, where he sat knee to knee with Douglas. Under a canopy of trees, the carriage came to a creaking stop. A silence pulled in around them. They heard a woman's voice under the muted hoof shuffle. It sounded as if she was invoking a blessing. "What is it?" called Webb. Creeley did not answer. "Move it, man! It's getting dark." Still, the carriage did not budge. Webb snapped the bottom door open with his foot, stepped out from the inner cab. Douglas followed. They stood in the black bath of trees. In the road, they saw the cold and grainy shape of a woman. She wore a grey woolen shawl and the remnants of a green dress. She had been dragging behind her a very small bundle of twigs, attached to a strap around her shoulders, pulling the contraption in her wake. On the twigs lay a small parcel of white. The woman gazed up at them. Her eyes shone. A high ache tightened her voice. "You'll help my child, sir?" she said to Webb. "Pardon me?" "God bless you, sir. You'll help my child." She lifted a baby from the raft of twigs. Good God, said Webb. An arm flopped out from the bundle. The woman tucked the arm back into the rags. For the love of God, she said, the child's hungry. A wind had risen up. They could hear the branches of the trees slapping each other around. Here, said Webb, offering the woman a coin. But she did not take it. She bent her head instead. She seemed to recognize her own shame on the ground. She's not had a thing to eat, said Douglas. Webb fumbled in a small leather purse again and held out a 6-penny piece. Still the woman did not take it. The baby was clutched to her chest. The men stood rooted to the spot. A paralysis had swept over them. Creedy looked away. Douglas felt himself become the dark of the road. The woman thrust the baby forward. The smell of death was overpowering. And later, when he arrives in Cork, he meets Isabel Jennings, and he's talking about the famine or thinking about the famine. It's in third person. There was enough food in the land to feed Ireland 3 or 4 times over, she told him. It was being shipped across to India, China, the West Indies, the exhaustion of empire. She wished there was something she could do about it. The truth could not be preserved by silence. Her own family had warehouses full of food farther down the river, bottles of vinegar, stocks of yeast, malting barley, even crates of fruit jam. But she could not, but it could not just be given away. There were laws and there were customs and there were issues of ownership, other complexities too, business alliances, extended contracts, taxation, the demands of the poor, the creation of moral illusions. It struck Douglas that Isabel carried the wounds of privilege. Perhaps then he did also. He leafed through the New Testament. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And yet, if he himself spoke out on behalf of the poor Irish, what would happen? What language could he create for this? To whom would he speak? The politics still confounded him. Who was Irish? Who was British? Who was Catholic? Who was Protestant? Who owned the land? Whose child stood rheumy-eyed with hunger? Whose house was burned to the ground? Whose soil belonged to whom and why? The simple way to see it was that the British were Protestant, the Irish were Catholic. One ruled, the other lay underfoot. But where did Webb fit in? And where did Isabel fit in? He would gladly have allowed himself to align with the desires of freedom and justice, but it was to his own known cause that he had to remain entirely loyal. 3 million voices. He could not speak out against those who had brought him here as a visitor. There was only so much he could take upon himself. He had to look to what mattered. What was beyond toleration was the ownership of man and woman. The Irish were poor, but not enslaved. He had come here to hack away at the ropes that held American slavery in place. Sometimes it withered him just to keep his mind steady. He was aware that the essence of proper intelligence was the embrace of contradiction, and the recognition of complexity was to be balanced against the need for simplicity. He was still a slave, fugitive. If he returned to Boston, he could be kidnapped at any time, taken south, strapped to a tree, whipped. His owners. They would make a spectacle of his fame. They had tried to silence him for many years already, no longer. He had been given a chance to speak out against what had held him in chains, and he would continue to do so until the links lay in pieces at his feet. And he thought now, he knew what had brought him here. The chance to explore what it felt to be free and captive at the same time. It was not something even the most aggrieved Irishman could understand. To be in bondage to everything, even the idea of one's own peace. His body, his mind, his soul had for years served only for the profit of others. He had his own people to whom he was pledged, 3 million. They were the currency of his freedom. What weight would he carry if he tried to support the Irish now too? Their agonies, their ambiguities, he had enough of his own. The barges passed, a river of food afloat. The sun went down over the rooftops of Cork. Thank you.
Thank you, Colum. Thank you for that. It's actually a part of the novel that I I think about actually quite a bit, because it almost seems as Douglas has this hierarchy when he talks about Ireland and Black America. He has this hierarchy of pain and suffering, where the Irish are hungry or poor, but they're not enslaved. And it always makes me think of what it would mean to die of hunger. I'm one of those people that always has to eat. I'm always eating. I get headaches if I'm hungry. I'm really grumpy. And so this feeling, this thought of dying from hunger and then being enslaved, it's hard to imagine any situation. But Douglas is always like categorizing them, and when he talks about Ireland. And so that's an interesting aspect. We can talk about it later, but that's a really interesting aspect for me in the text, and it's the one I think about often. Joel, would you like to read? I think you're going to read from the section on Anna.
Okay, I'm going to read from the section on Anna and on Ottilie. I've actually, besides the young adult novels that have been written by me, I've also written 7 adult novels. And Douglas's Women was, in fact, my 3rd novel. And it was inspired by the fact that Douglas once said, in effect, I am married to an old Black log. And as a Black woman, I got upset because I knew he was married then to a Black woman. And while later he would marry a white woman, Helen Pitts, he actually had a half Christian, half Jewish German mistress who was by his side and translated his work for 30 years. So you have the wife that he referred to as a log, Anna Marie Douglas, and the mistress, Ottilie Essing. So my novel's transgressive in that I'm trying to write about how they were abused or enslaved to Frederick Douglass. So both of them are free. And I'm going to begin with Anna, and she's on her deathbed in 1882. I used to fill him. I used to. Time once he told me I was the only free he needed. Time when he didn't want to get up from my arms. Time when I filled him, he filled me. The world loves Frederick Douglass, but I loved Freddie. I loved him when he had no name excepting nigger this, nigger that. When he looked at me, he was broken then. When he needed me, my flesh grew hot and I opened myself calling Freddie. I thought the 2 of us would create a world. I'm dying now. Freddie died long ago. Was that a good thing? No more Freddie, just the great abolitionist. Was that a good thing? See Mr. Death sitting in the rocker telling me to come on. I will, once I speak my mind like Freddie did. He told his tale, left me out. Begin at the beginning, tell it true. Everybody knows Frederick's story. This one here, be mine. The narrative of the life of Anna Marie Douglas, a free woman of color. I was born near Tux Creek in Carolina County. My parents were freed a month before I was born. I be 8 of 12 children. Never was a slave, never had to escape dogs or a bad massa. But I seen my share of misery. It come rolling down, searing my back just the same. Come when I least expected. Freddie endured much. I appreciate that. I don't appreciate his feelings that hurt makes a person finer. He was forged, he say, forged by steel in the fire. I was forged by love. That's what tore me up. That's what I didn't expect. How can something that causes the sky to be bluer than blue, sends warmth flooding your body, buckles your knees and opens your soul to music? How can what feels so good hurt till you want to scratch your skin off, snatch out the heart that feels so much? If love be true, you feel more than you felt possible, more everything, more glory, more pain at a touch. Frederick wanted me prim and proper, like white women seem to be. But I wonder if they is, truly. I'm a woman, and I feel everything. Even when I don't show it, I feel. Been feeling since the day I slipped out my man's body. The novel follows the arc of Frederick's narrative, that after there's a deathbed mentioned by Anna and Ottilie, they both go back in time, like Frederick did in his narrative, and say, I was born, and then I write their journey, just to end with a short paragraph so that you hear Ottilie's voice before she begins her story. So she too is in a sense on her deathbed, but actually she's going to be committing suicide. Suicide because her long-term love has married a woman far younger than her, and didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect my life to end this way. Me, 58, sitting like a moonling wrapped in furs, trying to stave off chills. The thought of America makes my heart cold. It didn't always. I am the snow queen. Love's betrayal has frozen my heart, sliver by sliver. Except for one small piece, my heart is ice. Frederick Bailey Douglas, dearest Douglas, do I dare say you did this to me? Or is the blame mine all along? I, Ottilie Essing, so smart, not smart enough. I'd best hurry, scribble these words before time disappears, love disappears, before I'm so cold, so solid, I cannot move except across the ocean from which there is no return, no renewal, no gliding across the great Atlantic, no recrossing of seas, only stillness and death. Always, I'd wanted to sail to America, land of high purpose and dreams. Think of it, a bold experiment to have one's customs, one's culture begin anew, to be reborn, to carve from the landscape a new world, not a nightmare world, but a realm of magical dreams, a land so vast and wide, anything can happen. A land not chained or closed tight and small, like Germany. I hadn't counted on love's treachery. I'm dying in Paris, the city of light, except there isn't any light. Frederick Douglass isn't here.
Thank you, Jewell. Thank you so much. I'm actually embarrassed to say that I don't think I gave Anna Murray Douglas that much of my thinking prior to reading this book. I can't recall if I ever considered, I don't know if I thought about Douglas in terms of his personal life at all prior to reading your book. And so reading this book really gave me a chance to think about not only Anna, but also like learning about Otelia Ossing. I had never heard of Otelia Ossing. And I guess she was a journalist and a writer and a suffragette in her own right and very active. So that was really interesting for me, and that for you to bring that aspect of these women's lives through this man that we all know. You grow up knowing his name and not necessarily knowing about the women around him.
Absolutely. And I think too, for me, what was interesting is that they were both free women, you know, one white, one black. And in their own ways, they actually become enslaved in terms of love and in terms of, I think, marital and love abuse to an ex-slave man, and writing their journeys. And unfortunately, Ottilie doesn't become free. You know, she kills herself. But I think Anna becomes free because Anna also has that, I think maybe you heard it, I didn't read the passages about it, but that African-American folklore and spiritual tradition. And I actually see that world and that common sense of that world having been not within Douglas as much, that one of his journeys in that becoming very much an assimilated Black man, becoming very much part of the Western tradition, he also had difficulty, I believe, carrying with him the force of African-American spiritual culture with him. And that's who Anna represents for me. I love, adore Douglas, but he, like any human being, is flawed, but perhaps even more so a victim not just of having been a slave, but also a victim that in learning to free himself, he had only the model of a Western tradition, you know, only a model of what white women were like, what his wife then should be, what it meant to, you know, to read and learn the arts, and all those things are wonderful, but that in fact allowed him to turn himself away from his own wife and his own other cultural heritage.
So this actually, and we can bring Colum into this conversation as well, I think, because Colum, when you started reading, you said that Transatlantic is largely about the peace process, which is interesting to me because I'm thinking of it as it's a search for freedom. That's how, when I teach it, I teach it from this perspective of about freedom, about this, how Lily and her descendants, her daughters, through Emily, through Lottie, there's women find themselves. So this search for suffrage and for freedom. But it's interesting also then to think about it as a part of the peace process. And so both texts to me, I think, highlight how women's suffrage and women's searches are part of the story too. You know, if we're thinking about the peace process in Ireland, then the stories of women in the book, you talk about how these women have lost their children. You know, you go through the names of the Irish name and then the English version, Liam, William, Cahill, Charles. And so I'm just thinking about how men, especially white men, but Douglas is the center of this conversation. Men have been at the forefront, and then there's these women stories that have also existed. But what's completely erased, and I think is highlighted through learning about Anna, is the stories of Black women. Like Attilia's story is a part of it. The story of Lily, her daughters, they have a record. There's something that's created with Emily, with Lottie, with Hannah. There's something that's created for them that's on the record. But Black women are marginalized, I think, in terms of the historical record. In Transatlantic, there's a couple of Black women figures that come up, but they're just named as the Negro woman. They're marginalized. Anna is named, but she also isn't visible. She doesn't get seen, and she's not treated in the same way as if she's treated in Jewell's text, where she actually is getting to tell her story. But as we know, her story, we're largely guessing and basing it on what we know from her daughter, from what her daughter is told. So I thought that was an interesting intersection between both of your texts, and I didn't know if you wanted to speak to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was listening to Jewell's reading, it was one of those moments where you realize how privileged we are to sort of enter the country of literature, and how remarkable that reading is, and how we can become alive in a body that is not our own, and a time that is not our own, and that we as readers get access to that sort of territory, and sort of fill up the lungs of the world. Sort of extraordinary reading, and I was really taken by it. I did think a lot about Anna while I was working on Douglas, but that was not the story as that I was focusing on when I was focusing on Douglas in Ireland. And I want to go back and actually, just as you said, get into her lives once again. Fiction. The job of fiction is to sometimes go into the anonymous corners of human experience and sort of sweep the room and raise the dust that others have left there, and out of the dust create something like really true and living. So that was part and parcel of the reading experience and listening, but it was also part and parcel of my relationship to the book, because in Transatlantic, the male figures are all taken from fiction, or the women figure, or from nonfiction, what we'd call nonfiction. The women figures are all fiction from Lily onwards, and there's a questioning in the book about who owns history and who has the right to tell history, and where does history penetrate, on what particular level. And so that was one of the things that I was trying to do, and to tell the story of Lily as equally important as the story of, say, George Mitchell, or Frederick Douglass, or these men who took the transatlantic flight across the ocean, and very important for you to pinpoint the role of women, and say even maybe especially in the peace process in Northern Ireland, right, later on in the Women's Coalition, and as people who were outraged about what was happening to the ones that we loved. One of the enduring images, my mom is from Northern Ireland, but one of the enduring images I have from my youth is the women, nearly all women, out on the streets of Ireland banging the dustbins to make the noise, to alert people who are there that the British Army are coming, but also as a form of protest. And the last thing I'll say in relation to what you just said, and having heard that astounding reading, is that the time that Edward Galeano says, the time that was continues to tick inside the time that is. So everything that happened then has influenced what is happening now, all the way up to what happened this summer in the States. It's really important for us to acknowledge, I think, that the time that Douglas let's just say that Frederick Douglass lived in really affects the time that is now. And even those 4 months in Ireland where he said, "Lo, I breathe, and the chattel becomes a man." He felt free there. There was no pejorative terms flung at him whatsoever in his whole 4 months in Ireland. And so I think all of this is extraordinarily important. And it was awoken by just thinking about Anna sitting there. Just extraordinary. Thank you so much, Jewell.
Oh, thank you so much. I think your work is brilliant. And I really love that last passage that you read, where you articulate all the sort of mental wrangling and emotional wrangling that Douglas has to do in response to what he's seen in Ireland, and the image of the child at the mother's breast starving, and how difficult and challenging that must have been. And so it's sort of it was almost as though I was getting, okay, Jewell, don't forget, this is what Frederick was doing, and the glory of what he did, and trying to be true to the abolitionist cause, and yet also being really a new kind of man in the world, and that being allowed by his travels abroad, and particularly in Ireland, and wrestling with that. But I still think that he had very often the right ideas, but in his personal life they were less carried through. So that in my novel I pretty much let Douglas's writing speak. So I don't make a lot of dialogue, it's just writings, or Audley's doing the translation. And he would give speeches and she would be doing the translating, in which he thanks every sort of European white woman, every American white woman, and yet he never thanks her. And yet her translation and helping him gain access to the German community to also support abolition sort of goes unremarked. And Anna at home raising the children and trying to survive on her own. And he never ever teaches her how to read. Now in my novel, I posit, that finally he was too busy, that he couldn't teach his wife language, even though he said, reading freed me. And then eventually Anna takes it as a passive aggressive maneuver of, okay, then I'm not going to learn. I'm just going to be me. And that tension then between this triangle. And Audley also spent a dozen summers in the Murray Douglas household. So Anna would be in the kitchen taking care of the kids. Audley would be out in the shed, doing work and translating with Douglas. And it's just so interesting that those two women in their specificity were really in a way overlooked. But in terms of the broad ideas, Douglas was a man ahead of his time and suffered in terms of suffragette and anti-abolition and just being him, the great orator. So it's just an interesting conundrum.
It brings up a point though that I mentioned after you finished reading Colum, which is that he had these great ideals. He envisioned the world to come out a certain way. Yet I can't help feeling every time I go back, and obviously I'm really just concerned for my work, I'm mostly concerned with what he's saying about Ireland and what is happening in connection to Ireland. But there almost seems to be a lack of empathy towards the Irish situation, the Irish problem. And I feel like you captured it a little bit when they're talking about the drink and how it's almost as if it's the hunger is being attributed to the problems with the drink. And of course, this is what he's hearing from the Protestants that he's with. And so that position that he has is very much flavored by who he's with at the time. But I don't know, it makes me question it. It always comes up for me. And so especially based on like the part that you read today, and I brought that up earlier, and hearing about how he was this man of letters. He was this man that was doing great work and he had a great vision. But he left out these women that were important in his life. And he also kind of marginalizes or minimizes at least the Irish situation, what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the extraordinary thing. This is the real Whitman moment, Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. And, when I first came upon the story of Frederick Douglass, he's 27 years old, he arrives in Dublin, he's still a slave. I thought, oh, what a story, fantastic. The more I read, the more I delved, the more I looked at his speeches, I was like, hold on a second here. What's going on? I'm a little disturbed. He's not speaking out on behalf of the poor Irish. And then I broke through because I said, well, this man is phenomenal, and in all sorts of ways. Well, I know he has this complicated relationship with his wife and he's leaving for a long time, but he is absolutely phenomenal, and all these ideas that he's championing. And then I began to love him again because I realized that what he cared about were the 3 million slaves at home, and he knew it. Was he staying in fancy Anglo-Irish houses? Yeah, he was. Was he eating well? Yeah, he was. Was he wearing fancy brocaded waistcoats and so on? Yeah, he was. But we all live with these contradictions in extraordinary ways. I mean, I'm sitting in New York right now in an apartment in Manhattan, and I know that 4.5 miles up the road, the second poorest congressional district in the United States is in the South Bronx, and things are going on there that as a citizen, I should be completely outraged about. But there are certain battles that you have to pick. And I think that what Douglas went through was this extraordinarily existential dilemma, and wondering what battle he had to pick. And in the end, he picked the right battle. And that's why I kind of love him for it. And he got even deeper for me at that particular stage. But I think you're right. There does appear to be, at first, a lack of empathy. But I don't think there was any lack of empathy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I do. I mean, I think what both of your novels do there, they make him human. And I think grappling with what it means to be great and what it means to be a powerful speaker and what it means to be dynamic in terms of driving and changing history is a heavy weight, but that realizing that this person also was human. And there's a new documentary out right now. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Martin Luther King Jr. and the FBI. It's called FBI MLK or MLK FBI. And basically it's centered on the fact that the FBI files are going to be released soon. And as a country, we're going to start learning things about Martin Luther King Jr. that we probably don't want to know. And I kind of felt that, like I felt there were these secrets that I'm learning from both of your books, especially your book, Douglas's Women, Jewell. I'm learning things about Douglas. I almost don't want him to be human. I don't want him to be that flawed person, because it changes. He becomes quite unlikable, I think, in your book.
I must say though, I am with Colum, and I do very much love. I mean, when you think of our history without a Frederick Douglass, it would be a terrible thing. That I love the man, but I remember when I wrote Douglas's Women, and I sometimes seem to be ahead of the curve in topics that I write about, because I actually got a lot of hate mail, a lot of call threats and call outs, because I dared, show the more human side of, Frederick Douglass's relationships. I do think that the young Frederick Douglass is the one that I love the most, that when he's fighting for abolition, suffragette just cause, but when he starts his other autobiographies, like My Freedom and Bond, In My Bondage, and, he does like 3 iterations of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and in each iteration, he becomes more exceptional, that he becomes more, I did it my way, so there's ways in which his journey, as he gained more and more fame, as he gained more and more money, I think it was corrupting. And also the idea that, think of it, even today, a Black man with a white woman in certain places in our country could be assaulted for that, for that interracial relationship. I'm in an interracial relationship, and I've lived through a lot, and my kids are still living through a lot because of colorism in America. And here he is in the 1880s, married a young white woman, and they let him live. So that sense of exceptionalism, I think, was also another cost that he had to pay in order to be who he was. And that makes him, to me, less empathetic as an older Douglass than that sort of wonderful firebrand Douglass when he put it all on the line with his narrative. There's actually a collection of Douglass's letters to his children, and he wanted all his children to be, somewhat, successful in the world. And yet he didn't seem to grasp that the world made room for a very special Black man, him, but that didn't mean they were going to make room for his children. And so his children were oftentimes writing and asking for money and asking for help. And I've always believed if somebody asks you for help, and particularly money, you just give it to them. If you don't worry, if you're going to worry about her, and then it's like, then don't give, because you're not giving freely. Well, Frederick would write pages upon pages of how, you know, his children were not good enough. He would belittle them. You know, I'm so disappointed in you. And then he would give them the money. And I think, again, that there's an evolution that we often don't talk about. And maybe one day, we should all look at how over the lifetime of a journey, the narrative of his slave experience and becoming free is just one aspect. And so he is, what is your word, Colum? The multitudes you were quoting, was that from Whitman? You know, that he was so much, and we are only getting glimmers, or trying to convey as novelists possible glimmers for other ways to see and interpret him. But he's still a great man, damaged as every African who was made into an African American was in some ways, not in some ways, was damaged. We are the only cultural group that were made the way that we were made. Okay, let's just kidnap you. And so there's so much. So the fact that he was able to do so much for such noble ideas and noble causes, I don't forget that. And I do love him for it.
Colum,
To follow from that, Chanté, could I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Your relationship then, when you're studying that time, your relationship with the Irish at that stage, and many people say that the Irish were not white at that particular stage, that it wasn't until later. Could you articulate something about that and how Douglas would have been, perceived, received, and looked at, and because I would love to know your take on that.
How he would have been perceived or received in Ireland or in America? In
No,
Ireland.
in Ireland. Yeah, forget about the Irish Americans. I just want to talk about the Irish, and were the Irish white at that particular stage? I mean, that's part of my question.
So my argument is that the quote is coming from Noel Intiev, and which is actually coming from James Baldwin. So there's an article that James Baldwin writes, and at the very last paragraph of the Baldwin of the essay, Baldwin talks about, the Irish came, for instance, the Irish come to America and they became white, and that we can be friends everywhere except for Boston. So this point that you've made about Irish America, having to take Irish America out of consideration. I mean, I've had to, my mother-in-law is from Dublin, and she'll say to me, she's like, but I am white. I don't understand when you say that. And so this isn't about whiteness, isn't about color, right? It's about power. And that's when we say the Irish became white, that's what we mean. Obviously, there's a difference between Douglas, a phenotypic difference between Douglas and the people that he sees there. But the Irish at that point don't have power. They don't have the agency. They don't have what we now associate with whiteness and what it means to be white. So when we talk about whiteness, we're talking about agency, we're talking about power. And it's interesting actually in your text then, because Lily goes from being not white to white very quickly. And that's that journey. Right? That's the journey to whiteness, that she can leave the poverty, she can leave the hunger, she can leave all of that behind. And on her skin, she doesn't have the stain of what would have kept her a slave, as Douglas does, right? Because he can still be taken back into slavery.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
There's some questions, and we don't have very much longer. Did that answer you? No.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, brilliant answer. Thank you for it. Yes.
So there's some questions that have come in about your process and how each of you did research and used the history to create the fiction.
Yeah, well, for me, a lot of it was, about reading the biographies and the autobiographies and the letters and the Isabel Jennings letters and anything I could get my hands on, but also peripheral things. I mean, one of the big questions for me was, do I have a right to do this? And that's a long, complicated question. But then who Douglas is in Ireland. Is that a job for an Irish novelist? Is that a job for an American novelist? Is it a job for a Black novelist? And all of these different things, or is it just a job from somebody who wants to tell some form of engaging with love, pride, pity, sacrifice, compassion, and all of those things? So what you have is all these facts and figures, but you really want to turn, facts are mercenary things. You can use them in whatever way you want, but what you really want to do is capture the emotional truth. And this is some of the tension between history making and fiction writing. And it's a long, complicated process for the novelist in particular. You try to make it as true as possible. I'll tell one quick story because I really want to hear what Jewell says about this. When I went to Frederick Douglass's house in Washington, D.C., he had barbells, right? And so, and they're there in his room. And he worked out long before most people were working out, long before Nautilus, and he was aware of his body. Now he's aware of his body because his body had been owned, right? But he was also a little bit vain, and also extraordinarily handsome. And so I thought, wow, that's amazing. That's truly amazing. I'm going to have Douglas bring barbells to Ireland. Now, I'm pretty sure that Frederick Douglass, at the age of 27, would not be putting barbells in his suitcase across. But I wanted him to have barbells because I wanted that consciousness of body. I wanted that consciousness of ownership to be. And the barbells were from melted down slave chains. Now that is a complete fiction, but I also hope that it's true.
Yes.
Vanity, actually, I know Jewell had something to say, but vanity comes up in your book. Actually, it comes up throughout. So there's a lot of instances where Douglas is very vain. He's looking in the mirror. There's, he goes to the shop, he gets the new vest. Webb is constantly commenting on how he looks. But you also mentioned it in the George Mitchell section. I don't know if anyone's ever brought that up. George Mitchell talks about, old age isn't for vanity. And so there's this theme of vanity, especially in vanity within men, that is circulates throughout the text.
Yeah, probably, I'm probably sitting here, the vainest one of the lot, but nothing to be vain about. But I think I hadn't even thought of it as a theme. But this is where art is wonderful, because your readers extend your themes for you, and you learn new things. And this is exactly what it's got to do. It's got to throw the question into the pot.
But I don't, Jewell. So also for you, like doing the history, this actually comes up in the chat as well. There is no evidence that Ottilia and Douglas are ever
I disagree.
So there's some letters, there's some innuendo. There's actually another suffragist that it creates a story that you mentioned her in your novel when he's in England and he sees the other suffragists. And so there was some, I can't remember her name right now, I have it written down, but there is some rumor around her and him. But Ottilia and he are able to have this relationship. They have a very public relationship for many years without the accusation of having.
That's not true.
Oh, okay.
And actually, and I've seen the questions in the chat too. Okay. And the whole notion that you can damage history, and I actually think my novel does not damage history. Everything that's there that Frederick says, he actually wrote or gave a speech about, and to me, there is evidence of Ottilie. There's actually, when she lived in Hoboken, for 9 months out of the year before she went to go with the Summers, she suffered greatly and was, called, in effect, the Jewish whore, because her relationship with Douglas was was known, whether it was always sexual. Or so in that sense, was she a lifelong mistress? I think, to me, you know, we can debate that, but she actually did love him very, very much. And she gave up her own ability to have a family, her own ability, you know, to have children, and basically she waited for him. But I don't think it's sensational to say that she suffered for being known, if not then exactly his mistress all the time, that people commonly gossip. And there's evidence to me in the letters that make it clear that they had some sexual knowledge of one another, you know? So I don't think that's far off the mark. I do think it's part and parcel of how, well, when I was writing this novel, Bill Clinton had his affair with Monica Lewinsky. And I think the urge to still protect the man is always still there. There was also a reference that somebody said they had never heard about, the reference to Anna Murray as the old black log. And actually that's in a biography that was done by Professor Andrews. And I can give you the citation later if somebody wants to email me, because his daughter was going to marry an ex-slave man, but his daughter's fiance was not as gifted as Douglas. And in that context, Douglas was against the marriage of Anna to an ex-slave man, because she's now an educated Oberlin College woman and she's Douglas's daughter. And he literally said, in effect, don't do as I did. Don't be married to an old black log.
How interesting. I mean, there was something that came up for me, especially reading your book, Jewell, that I felt like I was spying. That like there was something, and I guess this is also, and I have that MLK FBI documentary in my head as well, because what Hoover was doing ultimately was wrong, right? These recordings of Martin Luther King Jr., of MLK, were wrong, and we shouldn't know about it. We shouldn't know about that private aspect of him. Yet it's interesting, and I want to know more. And so sometimes I was reading it, and I was like, there was these lines where this is from Ottilia's diary, and I felt like I was privy to something that should be kept private. I don't know. And I don't know if it's about protecting the man. I think that's an interesting point. But I definitely felt at sometimes that these are secrets, like that some of this is supposed to be private. I don't know.
I'm really sorry that you felt that way, because I think that was part of the point that I was trying to make, that this is the women's story. So it's like this impulse to maybe protect, or the impulse to, oh, the man had an affair. I mean, people have affairs, okay? You know, and that ultimately it's about hearing their voices. So when you're writing, or when I feel I'm writing, I'm not trying to get all true historical facts, though I do, particularly in terms of Douglas, had, you know, tried to line my ducks up as best I could, that this is what was real. It is the emotional truth of two women who were just as important to the anti-abolitionist and suffragette movement, you know, as Douglas in their own way. You know, somebody who's cooking and cleaning and raising the kids so you can go out and fight the good fight, that's important work. Somebody who's translating and opening up, you know, other opportunities for publication, that's important work. It was Ottilie Essing who told Frederick Douglass, don't get involved with that crazy John Brown, right? And so she did advise him very much, you know, politically. And actually, Frederick didn't listen to her. So what happened? You know, they came after him after John Brown was arrested, and he once again had to go across the Atlantic Ocean. So Yeah, anyway,
I mean, and I think that's emphasized in both texts though too. He's never home.
he's
Anna
never
Anna
home.
is doing the work that, and which brings up the earlier point that I had made, you know, this invisible labor of Black women, right? Anna was doing the work. There's a question for you, Colum, from Mary Hendrickson. She says, thank you to both authors for amazing books. I have a question for Colum on the character of Lily. Is the issue misunderstanding between her and Douglas that she was not seen or understood by Douglas? She's mortified in Cork when he does not recognize her, yet she changes her life because of him. And then also when she takes her daughter to see him, she also doesn't say anything. It's like, oh, he won't recognize me, which I actually think at that moment he would have he would have recalled her at that moment, I think. But I don't know, what your answer for Mary?
I mean, it's a great question, and you know, it was one of the things that I was trying to probe, and it went back to this issue of power and who has the power, and who's speaking to it at that particular stage. Lily had none of the power, and then she goes to America, and then she farms ice of all things, and she changes her life. And I still don't know the answer to the question about whether or not Douglas would have recognized this character. I think there's a real tension there for me, but trying to create these characters. An interesting thing that Nabokov says. He says he doesn't believe any of the stuff that your characters take you over and you don't know what you're doing as a writer. He says all my characters are galley slaves, and that you do the writer's bidding for them, but not for me. Certainly not in this case. And one of the gorgeous things about writing and about reading and engaging in these historical moments, Tim has got all these great questions about this, is that you get a chance to get at what Jewell is talking about, the textural truth, and which really is the heart of the matter. Is the texture of it true? And we all know, we can feel deep in our hearts whether or not this stuff is true or not. It's like the question of what is pornography and what is art. Well, you have to. You know it. It's that famous case. It's the same with your characters. If you are true to them and if you capture their contradictions, then we're talking about the messiness of human experience as much as anything else. And messy is okay, because just like we've all said here today, we are all messy in extraordinary ways. And our ideas are messy. And the central disease, especially right now, is the disease of simplicity and people wanting everything to be so simple. Let's embrace contradiction and say and have some of the mystery bind us together in certain ways.
We can end with one last question, unless there was something else you all wanted to offer. I always think about, when I read Transatlantic, I think about the fact that you've capitalized both the T and the A. And I think about this joining of America and Ireland, for me, from my perspective. And I think there's this transatlantic feel in both texts is about the joining, right? In Douglas's women, Ottilia and Anna's lives are joined together. They're brought together. This woman from Europe and this woman from America, and they're joined together through Douglas. And in Transatlantic, Lily is in her family, the female lineage in her life are going back and forth across the Atlantic. And so I didn't know if you wanted to close with maybe this idea of the both sides and how these lives are intersected.
for me, I was surprised in the novel when Ottilie comes looking for Douglas and she finds Anna at home alone. And the two of them sit and have tea. And Anna has advocated that her own daughter go to Oberlin College. She's also advocated for her children to learn from this white woman, that she really was, you know, always looking out for the best interests of her kids. And yet as a woman, when she's sitting there with the person she believes has been an impediment to a relationship, they find a great sense of unity in their gender, that their womanhood and the struggles that they had, that well-educated, you know, multilingual white woman and the seemingly uneducated, you know, illiterate Black woman come together and have a unity that speaks of, to me, a great awareness and a great compassion. And I think more than anything else, that really was part of what I wanted to sort of celebrate. And like Douglas's narrative, where, you know, he goes through that arc where, you know, he tells, you know, his slave breaker, you know, you're gonna have to kill me, you know, if you think you want to, you know, keep me enslaved. That he mentally breaks open his soul to freedom. And so when he actually becomes literally free, it's kind of anticlimactic in a way. It's that moment of his awakening of his own potential. And I was trying to contrast that with the two women who had their own potential, had their own unity that had been suppressed and submerged because of the triangle, because of the intersection with a man.
Thank you. Colum.
And I would say I'm just humbled by this this moment, this time, this engagement, the fact that we're able to do it, and you know, we have this central figure whom we're examining and talking. And I'm just sitting back here thinking, you know, there's a young Black kid in Dublin right now, or in Limerick right now, looking at this, whose life is going to be shifted by reading about Douglas, or even, you know, everything that's happened during this Douglas week. This sort of engagement is a thing that I, as a person of two countries, transatlantic, born in Ireland, living in the States, I'm keenly aware of, and I'm just grateful to both of you for opening so much of this stuff up for us. I wish we had another hour to talk. We are truly transatlantic. We are truly transatlantic.
We are. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Awesome.
What a wonderful opportunity to get to ask authors of books you've read questions, and also I've studied, and so I really appreciate it. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me. Thank you all who came and asked your questions. I really appreciate it. And thank you also to the host for Douglas Week.
Bravo to everyone. Great work. Douglas's Week, such a marvel. You are all just awesome. So I'm going to walk around with a spirit of celebrating you this entire weekend for what you've accomplished. It is amazing. Colum, pleasure meeting you. Chanté, pleasure.
Thank you. And I might actually look you up when I'm on the West Coast, if you don't mind.
No. Open up. That's Colum and everybody else, okay? I'm up in Seattle. It's like, come on up, you know, which is I'm trans-coastal, not transatlantic. And one of the reasons has to do with racism, you know, from being in Pittsburgh and finding out the Pacific Northwest. Though now recently, because of the Proud Boys and the white supremacists, and you know, you can't escape it in America, even still. So we need it, and we still need to honor the warriors such as Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, and all the others to follow, including that young Black boy or Black girl in Cork.
Thank you. Sarah, I think you were going to say something.
I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for a really wonderful event, so engaging and natural and lively and really, really uplifting. So thank you for your time, Chanté, Jewell, Colum. We so appreciate you being here. This has been a real highlight of Douglas Week. And everything continues tomorrow. We're not done, even though it's a Sunday. And we will have Our Strong Women tomorrow night. And we've obviously talked a lot about women in Douglas's life this evening. And tomorrow we'll have a very special event with Lord Mayor Hazel Chu, Emma DeBeery. It'll be hosted by Suzanne Lynch. So we hope that those of you here can make along to that. And remember to check out the rest of our events at douglasandcork.com. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening and a great day to those of you stateside. Thank you.
Bye.